Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
Vice President Kamala Harris has named a running mate. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is joining the ticket, known to insiders as a happy warrior for Democrats, with an appeal to middle America.
Donald Trump tries to mock Vice President Harris for laughing. You never see this guy laugh. You never see him do these normal things. Imagine when I go home at night, I pick up the Frisbee and throw it, and my dog catches it, he comes over, he gets the belly rub for being a good boy. Picture these guys doing that kind of stuff. They just can't. And what it allows us to do is, we hear where you're coming from.
The former high school teacher and football coach will go toe-to-toe with Trump's V-pick. That's J.D. Vance. Sasha Eisenberg is a journalist and author of The Lie Detectives, in search of a playbook for winning elections in the disinformation age. Adam Wren is a national political correspondent for Political. Great to have you both here.
Great to be here.
Sasha,
good to be with you.
What is it about Tim Walz that caught Harris's eye?
One, I think he can be a strong partner if she makes it to the White House. He has long service in Congress, which will help her. She had only a short time in the Senate before she came to the vice presidency, and I think she probably got a sense from looking over Biden's shoulder how important it can be to have relationships on the Hill. And then she represents a sort of personality that Democrats hope can get them to reconnect with the type of white blue-collar workers, especially in the Rust Belt, who have moved increasingly far away from the party, and particularly in the Trump years.
Adam, what do you think?
I think she's picked a tonal moderate here who Republicans will brand as, the most progressive addition to the ticket ever. He's in one of the few states that has a Democratic trifecta. And even though he was somewhat of a moderate in his 12 years in Congress, he increasingly moved to the left as governor with the ability to do so from the rubber stamp of the legislature. There is free, public tuition to public universities there. They have free K through 12 public lunches. But I think, tonally, he'll be a significant match for J.D. Vance. This is someone who has served in the military, who is familiar with sort of the rural America. And, I think ultimately this is a pick that Harris and her allies thought would meet the number one requirement of picking a vice president, which is, doing no harm. He does no harm, I think, to the coalition, excites progressive donors, and ultimately does not have some of the policy baggage that Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, does.
So Josh Shapiro, we'll get back to him in a moment, but Pennsylvania was considered a big draw because there are many who say you cannot win the White House if you can't win Pennsylvania. Does this choice today, what does it do to that dynamic? Sasha?
Kamala Harris still has a strong position in Pennsylvania. Polling in the last couple of weeks suggests that the race is about even there. Obviously, Joe Biden won there in 2020. So it's not as though she disadvantages herself in Pennsylvania. What she did here was she had a number of choices, not just Shapiro, but also Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, who appeared as though they could give her a direct boost in their home states and battleground states. And Walz is a different route. It is... I think there's a sort of small geographic angle here that's worth mentioning, which is that there's a chunk of northwestern Wisconsin that gets its television and radio signals from Minnesota, where you have a population that commutes across the state borders. And so there are voters there for whom Walz is something of a hometown figure. But she picked somebody who will match, complement her on the ticket, as Adam mentions. Certainly won't distract or diminish from what she's going to be pitching voters in Pennsylvania and Arizona and elsewhere.
Adam, talking about complimenting her, Walz won in a Republican district, and he served there for 12 years. Is that part of his appeal to Harris?
Absolutely. I mean, we knew that one of her top priorities in this pick was finding a governing partner. This is someone who knows the Hill, who was involved in the Democratic Gubernatorial Association, someone who has relationships on his side of the aisle, across the aisle, and really will have a chance here to help define Republicans in a way that I think will ultimately boost Harris. I do think that he is going to receive significant scrutiny about what he called his own, quote, abject failure to manage the riots that we saw in his state in 2020 in terms of, getting the National Guard in and dealing with that. I think
that was after George Floyd.
That's correct. Yeah. And so this was a cultural flashpoint, and he was very self-critical about his own handling of the situation. So I think that, gives Democrats a chance to talk about public safety and crime. But really in their opening messages here, their statements on Walz's candidacy, they don't have a significant amount to say here. They said they pointed about some of his jokes about rural America, but beyond that, don't have kind of a governing attack on him that seems to be winning the day at the moment.
I noticed that they used the word dangerously liberal team.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, they're going to call this the most progressive, most liberal ticket in the history of the country. But really, putting a tactile feel on what that means to the average voter is difficult when you're making an ideological contrast here. I mean, Minnesota ranks as one of the most business-friendly states in the country. It's high on other standards of national ranking in terms of health. So really drilling down on that argument and making it something that feels visceral to voters is going to be a bit of a challenge.
Sasha, Tim Walz coined the phrase weird. I mean, I don't know if he coined the phrase, but he certainly used it in a way that caught on, and it's already become a part of the campaign. What does that say about his communication style and his ability to frame the story that the Harris team wants to tell in this campaign?
Yeah, look, he's been governor since 2018, and he did not rush to the national spotlight the way that some of his peers did. You think about Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, Gavin Newsom in California, Andrew Cuomo, formerly governor of New York. These are people who wanted to be big television stars from the moment that they entered office. Walz did not do that. He's sort of well connected among his fellow governors. He's head of the Democratic Governors Association, but it's not until the past week or two that many Americans outside Minnesota caught a look at him. And it turns out that he's, pretty gifted on camera, if not especially polished. But the weird thing, which has really caught on, as you mentioned, is I think is a sign of how Democrats are sort of rethinking a lot of the anti-Trump messaging that they used for 8 years now. And the Harris-Walz ticket gets a little bit of a reset in terms of how it wants to frame itself. And I think that this suggests a sort of new line of, if not attack, of sort of mockery or disdain that we'll be hearing from them.
Sasha, does it help that he is a white, middle-aged man?
I think ultimately it was going to be inevitable that there was going to be a white man on this ticket. There was very little talk about anyone being picked by Harris who wasn't a white man. Josh Shapiro, the other finalist, the governor of Pennsylvania, is younger. Walz is about the same age that Harris is, so nearly 20 years younger than Trump, but maybe not entirely the next generation. But all the finalists that she had were white men, and there was not a lot of agitation within the party for her to choose somebody who was a woman or a person of color.
Let's think now about how Walz will fare against J.D. Vance. Sasha, how do you see those two going head-to-head?
They will probably have a debate against one another, although the debate schedule is very much in flux this year, and I would not make any bets on when or how that happens. Superficially, they're sort of similar. They're both, as Adam suggested, these are Midwestern guys who like to sort of define themselves as salt of the earth, working class guys that that the fact is Walz has a resume that it fits it a little better. He's not a lawyer like Vance. He did not go to an Ivy League school. He did not work in the tech industry. And so we've already kind of seen Walz pick at Vance as a bit of a phony on that front. And but fundamentally, after a day or two of a VP selection being made, typically there's very little public attention on the background or views of a vice presidential nominee. They can be helpful because they are a second body who can go out and raise money in places where the presidential nominee isn't. They can go and get media attention in states, in other states. It's a way of ideally sort of being a force multiplier, having another prominent figure who can reach out. And I suspect we will not be thinking a whole lot about the Walz-Vance contrast, after the end of this week.
And yet, Adam, we have been hearing a lot about Trump's pick in J.D. Vance. There has been a lot of focus on things he's said in the past, ridicule about comments he has made. Even Donald Trump himself has sounded a little bit critical of Vance. How do you see that affecting this story going forward?
Well, I think we can definitively say this number of weeks into the Republican ticket that this was not the optimal choice for Trump to make. He made it in a vacuum after the attempted assassination, and we know that at that moment it seemed, facing Biden, that he was a world beater, that the political playground was his to win, and he made Vance the selection as his running mate in that sort of milieu. And now the tables have turned and the earth has shifted beneath him. And, Vance has attracted a lot of negative attention here. He's drawn unfortunate contrast with the top of the ticket. I mean, Trump is, even though he ushered in the end of the Roe versus Wade, he's no cultural warrior when it comes to issues like abortion. Vance, on the other hand, has taken pretty hardline stances on abortion in his comments, going back to his Ohio Senate run. And so certainly the focus is on him more than it is on Trump, and not in a positive way. Contrary to that, if Walz flies under the radar over the next few days, then I think that Harris will have effectively, won this stage of the general election in terms of who her running mate is.
We have a little bit of tape of J.D. Vance talking about Kamala Harris from the Republican convention. Let's listen.
She thinks that she's better than us. She thinks she's better than you. She thinks she's smarter than you. She thinks you need to be told how to live your life. But this November, let's tell the Washington elites, let's tell Kamala Harris, mind your own damn business. We're electing Donald J. Trump, President of the United States.
Sasha, how do you think the Republicans are going to deal with this new candidate? And I mean, they've got two new candidates, if you want to look at it that way. The big surprise of this campaign so far has been on the Democratic side. What happens next?
Look, I think the Republican focus is going to stay on Kamala Harris and her record. I think there's probably, they think more to pick at there than there is in Walz's, and they recognize that, all research we have indicates that voters make their decisions about the candidates at the top of the ticket and not the running mate. And so I think that, if they can, especially over the next few days, try to use the Walz pick to say something about Harris's values, that she's a leftist. They'll do that, but I suspect they will go, as Adam mentioned, it's been pretty thin gruel so far this morning, and they will probably go back soon to talking about her. And that is probably where both sides see this campaign being fought out.
Adam, when we look at American election campaigns, where we all know about the so-called October surprise, we've had July surprises. What else are you expecting? What are you looking for on the horizon now that the two VPs are chosen? We're heading into the Democratic convention. What's the next big thing in the window, and what can we expect that might be unexpected?
Well, we're still waiting on resolution to whether there will be another debate at the top of the ticket. Donald Trump has pulled out of the ABC interview for all intents and purposes. And, as we turn to the convention here in a couple of weeks in Chicago, I think there will be questions about whether or not this pick in Walz has deflated some of the expected protests over the Middle East that we had planned to see. Shapiro could have ignited those even further on the left, but you wonder whether or not some of that will be dampened now given the Walz choice here. And so I think, the convention is something that we can look to. I think there are also questions given the revelation that we saw this past weekend about the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff's affair. Are there things about Kamala Harris that haven't yet come to light yet? And what will they say about her as a potential commander-in-chief? Are there things that we don't know about her relationship with Joe Biden? We know that in the Biden world, there was some reticence about having her as the top of the ticket, whether or not she could, win and beat Donald Trump. And so I think that it's certainly something to watch.
Sasha, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, such great points by Adam. And I would just add, this pick by Kamala Harris was made on a more compressed timeline than any other vice presidential selection we've seen, at least in the modern era. And typically candidates take 3 or 4 months to choose a running mate. A lot of that time is spent researching their backgrounds, looking into everything they've ever said, every vote that they've taken, all of their financial dealings, looking back over their tax returns. And then some of it is figuring out to what extent they sort of jibe personally in their that they see eye to eye. This all happened in less than 2 weeks for Harris. And there's a possibility that, they haven't seen everything that's in Tim Walz's record. We've already seen, since Vance was selected, a number of quotes come out that it did not seem like the Trump campaign was prepared for, things that he said in podcasts and the like. And they had a sort of normal timetable to make that decision. So I think we should be aware of the possibility that there are revelations about Walz's background or things that he said that Kamala Harris has to answer for. And we could also maybe begin to see little bits of friction between them or their teams, given that they did not have a lot of time to figure out if they were compatible.
And then they have to do so much work together. So much is made of the relationship and how the potential president and potential vice president might work together. But I want to wind up this conversation by asking you, kind of on a deeper level, about the role of the vice president in the American political system. Who do you think has been the vice president in modern history who's had the most impact? I'll start with you, Sasha.
I mean, I would think about Dick Cheney, who almost single-handedly redirected American foreign policy after September 11th, which obviously was not something that George W. Bush anticipated would be in front of them when they ran in 2000. We should also talk about Kamala Harris. We think about the vice president being called upon if the president's sick or incapacitated. But we now see a model of a vice president stepping into the president's shoes that we haven't seen before. And I think that might be something that voters sit with a little bit this year when they look at Vance and Walz.
Adam?
Yeah, I think those are thoughtful choices by Sasha. I would point to former Vice President Mike Pence, who at great personal political cost to himself, it ultimately ended his presidential campaign, really put his thumb on the scale for the continuity of government, the continuity of democracy, and of the transition of the peaceful transition of power by accepting the states and Congress doing his job as vice president and accepting Joe Biden's presidency.
It was so good to talk to both of you today. Thank you so much.
And you.
Thank you.
Sasha Eisenberg is a journalist who covers U.S. politics. He's the author of The Lie Detectives: In Search of a Playbook for Winning Elections in the Disinformation Age. Adam Wren is a national political correspondent for Politico.